Yes.
All right, it's great to see everybody. Welcome. We have, let me see, let me check my math here.
Ciao.
Oh, okay. We have this week, then next week, then we're pow, then we're done. So we have 4 classes left to have a series of discussions. I'm going to try and get Deho, Jeremy Green, to come hang out with us one of those sessions. Maybe Pila for one of those sessions. But that means we're going to have to start devoting some pretty serious time to our final projects, figuring out how we're going to do this, collaboration, what should it look like, what should be in there, where we're going to get the pictures. Um, but we're certainly in wind down mode. So what I thought I would do um, is like we've read a lot of stuff, and my hope is you have read a lot of stuff, that we're reading the same amount of stuff, because like this informs you a lot as far as becoming the path to becoming a language teacher, seeing what's going on in other places with language revitalization. Um, so I thought maybe we'll take next week's readings and just put them all in the parking lot and just say, okay, maybe we've read enough. Okay, so those are there. They're also important. But I think personally there was a bunch of stuff we read just about language revitalization, language programs, but then we sort of moved into looking at Hawaii, New Zealand, and Mohawk, particularly Six Nations, right? So Mohawk is on both sides of the border. United States, Canada, they have language programs in both places, and they have a lot of similarities to the other Iroquois languages. So Oneida, what are the other ones? Oneida, do I know? Let me go take a look. Oops. In order to do an internet search. Oh, I didn't find all the buses. Now I gotta do crosswalks. I guess I've got boosted security here. That's a cross. Oh, that's still a crosswalk. How many crosswalks do I have to find? Okay, there we go. Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, Tuscarora. So those are the languages that are related. So there's certainly different languages, uh, but I think it's probably a type of thing where if you've learned one, you could learn the others probably significantly faster than you could other languages. Whole bunch of similarities, similar structures and stuff like that. Their languages, the difference primarily, so if we look at Maori and Hawaiian, go back, those are the same language. If you go back far enough, they're the same language. So if you learn one, you learn the other probably easier than you could other languages. Some of them it's just a sound switch, especially if you go Tahitian to Hawaiian, it seems like it's pretty close. Maori and Hawaiian is a little bit more distant. Um, so we can look at some of those things though, like from the perspective of Southeast Alaska, anyways, of being coastal peoples, and there's a bunch of stuff that we could sort of share, sort of similarities, just being indigenous, North America, but like Pacific Islander is kind of a whole different group, right? Culturally, they have a lot more in common with Tahitian and Maori and Rapa Nui and other Pacific Islanders than they might to us. Whereas Mohawk, also pretty far away, pretty different, like corn, a lot of different things going on over there. White corn's really important to them. The sort of three-tiered growing things, so you got the corn, the squash, and the beans, and so there's a lot of stuff, there's different land base, different stories. But one thing that is kind of similar is probably just as far as the structure of a language is likely more similar to Alaska Native languages than Hawaiian would be. Conceptually, there might be some things in Hawaiian that are kind of similar to in Tlingit perhaps than in Hawaiian. But one thing with Mohawk is there's a bunch of little parts that all squished together. So, okay, so thinking about this stuff and thinking about the Mohawk language, like I guess let's just start here. Like looking at these three sort of big sets of documents. So the documents that we looked at with Hawaiian, and the documents we looked at with Maori, and now the document that we're looking at with Mohawk. What are some things that you take from each of these? Like what seems helpful to you, what seems relevant, and what kinds of things are going to inspire you in the ways that you go forward and continue to build language programs?
I've been starting to pull a lot of ideas from the second half of this last reading. I don't know how to say the language. Haudenosaunee. How do you say it? Anyway, I really like how they have ideas for engaging with students in the language, especially around story-centered learning. And so one of the things I wrote down was the revised Bloom's taxonomy discussion prompts, which are just basically questions in the language about what did you see? What did you learn from it? What were the people doing? Yeah, thanks for putting it in the chat. I don't know how to pronounce it, but
I'm checking on it now. Sorry. I meant to say something else, but there's that in.
okay, goodness cheese. But yeah, I've been writing down a lot of ideas. I like how the second half of this reading just has like so many ideas. Like if you want to do task-based learning, they have how to plan it, how to implement it, how to assess your students. And I've been sort of pulling that to put in my philosophy of education.
That's great. Yeah, like I really like, let me share my class notes. That's what I meant to. So I was trying to find different ways. I use this like program called Evernote to take notes sometimes. I like the ability to create notebooks and then notes within the notebook, but it doesn't seem like there's very good options for like copying and pasting and stuff like that. Um, but anyway, so I was thinking about this. Let's see. I want to just in turn, let me put this in the, so this sort of idea of really keeping track of ascending, right? So we're going with remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. And Deho his background is linguistics. So I thought it'd be good to go over a few different terms. Let's see, how do I want to do this? Hold on. Maybe I'll just click on this. Okay. Maybe. So a couple things I thought were important to just sort of cover. So he talks about pragmatics and prosody and lexical knowledge and morphology and syntax. And so just in terms of like making sure that we understand what those things are. So I just have some quick definitions of these. I'm not a linguistic. I'm not a linguist. I'm not a linguistic. There, that should say it all. I should just open my speech at like some
linguistical linguistics.
I'm not a linguistic. But so when we talk about pragmatics, we're talking a lot about like the language use and the contexts, right? And so there's a lot to be done in these fields, no matter what we sort of think of these different terms. It's really good to think about how languages work and how our work sort of is divided into those areas. Because maybe if your language program gets big enough, there's people who sort of go forward and they take on the expertise in these different areas. So like, how do people take turns? How do you signal that you're still talking? Or how do you signal that you want to talk? Like someone told me one time, people who speak English, they do this little thing where their mouth makes a little tiny click. So you go, so it's like little tongue off the roof of the mouth type of thing. And someone said, like, that's for English speakers, that's how you signal that you'd like to talk, right? So there's these little things that you sort of do with language that you might not think about all the time. So in the indigenous language, how do you signal when you'd like to talk? And how do you signal when it's your turn to talk? And how do you not interrupt people? And I was thinking of this the other, thinking back to my days in my undergraduate, um, back in the 90s, and hanging out with Ojibwe people. And I was just sort of reflecting with some of my friends that even culturally, like the way a lot of those folks would speak English, this is a generalization, but it would be pretty slow, and you'd have to be careful so you didn't just sort of interrupt them, because there were some groups of us, we just talk fast and we're just like one thing, then another thing, then another thing, right? And then I was just hanging out with some folks from there and talking. It was just like, wow, this conversation could take all day. But I had to sort of create a cultural shift within myself to say, oh, you know what? I'm the one who's too fast, and so just thinking like that, the speed that people talk, the ways that people talk. Um, so it's kind of pragmatics that deals with a lot of that stuff. Uh, Prosody has to do with the rhythm of the language. So in English, if you take classes on prosody, you're probably reading poetry, right? So if you ever read, what was it? Llama Llama, Red Pajama, right? So like that book is like Llama Llama, Red Pajama, blah, 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 blah. So there's a pattern, right? And the language dictates those patterns. And so a lot of people who write in patterns like that, if you're iambic pentameter, if you're writing sonnets, bust out some sonnets, then you need to do like a certain syllable count. And so for that, it's all about the stress of English and the rhythm of English and making sure that that fits to your poetic forms. But prosody, as far as indigenous languages, a lot of it is the tone, the pace, the delivery. And this is a lot of fine tuning, right? Because you could have folks who speak in your language, but they just don't sound, there's something that's just not quite there. And it's something that could get into a lot of debate about how things should sound, how should new learners sound, and how do you sort of, I think it's okay if new learners don't sound like fluent speakers because they're not speakers with high fluency. But how do you sort of make sure that you're catching those things, and what are those things, And sometimes like people make this sound when they should be making that sound, or they put the rising tone for questions, or stuff like that. Lexical knowledge means it's knowledge that can be expressed in words. And so there was also like symbolic, there's a bunch of different terms in here that it's good to sort of get a little bit of a handle on. And morphology is building words. So can folks use the words? And then syntax is building sentences. So you can have folks that are looking at these different parts of languages. And this is where sometimes bringing in a linguist is really super helpful. So like we shouldn't be anti-linguistics, I think. Um, Duck Juice.
Um, um, okay, so I have a question. Um, when our elders stressed a word uh, or emphasized a word or put their passion, their spirit in their words, is does that fall under prosody?
Yeah, I think that falls under both pragmatics and prosody, right? So like
Prosody.
there could be certain language you use on just a day-to-day basis. But then there could be something like, oh, if you're telling stories, you got to talk like this. Or if you're running ceremony, you got to talk like this. And so sometimes it's sort of saying like that it needs to fit these certain areas. But yeah, if they're putting emphasis on things, the other thing is like you'll see structural repetition, right? Sometimes they'll say the exact same sentence twice, and sometimes they'll say something and then refer back to that thing. Or, and part of this could be when someone talks, does that require a response? And if it does, how is that response supposed to go? Like, from a Tlingit perspective, like if there's some ceremony and someone from one moiety stood up and said something, like it shouldn't just carry on. Like somebody should stand up and acknowledge and receive those words. Or else sometime later, someone has to stand up and say, a little while ago, your words just floated into the air. Yeah, and so now we've, and so these are the other things too. Like behind just the words and the sounds, there's a whole culture. There's a whole culture there, you know. And part of this, it's this mix of language and behavior and knowledge. And it's really interesting as you build your programs, you build your own personal teaching philosophy. These are some things that you're going to find, right? Because we'll see like how the language, sometimes a language, I think a lot of times refers to something that is just known. It's just known. For if you're looking at the Raven stories or something like that, like there usually is a whole bunch of stuff that everybody assumes everybody already knows. And so yeah, let me check the chat here. Yeah, and so like when you start looking at this stuff too, like task-based learning, TPR, TPRS, and a whole bunch of different methods. Like what my hope is you're looking at these and like all of these methods are available to me. I can go learn about them, I can go implement them, I can use them as a teacher, and whatever works for the combination of the ways I teach, the content I'm teaching, and the audience I'm teaching, I'll find the right combination of things. Like it seemed like when we were learning Hawaiian, they did TPR, but just for day one. We didn't do it after that. So we moved pretty quickly into just sort of, and so, but the other thing is like trying to balance this stuff so that you're getting the right combination of hearing the language, using the language, knowing the structure of the language, and having your confidence in yourself. Like for me, like those are probably the four big things that you just really balance. I might even put hearing and listening, or listening and hearing and speaking in the same area. And then building your vocabulary, right? You got to learn a whole bunch of words and what type of words those are. Then there's the grammar, and then there's believing in yourself. But like you'll sort of develop your own. But if someone starts learning the language you're working in, I think they should have a pretty clear idea of what they're expected to do and where they're expected to go. But then how to convey that is always challenging, right? So the other thing I was thinking about is kind of mapping things out in this let me see on this sort of basically a 9-point scale from very beginner, so beginner, beginner low, beginner mid, beginner high, intermediate low, intermediate mid, intermediate high, advanced low, advanced mid, advanced high. And then one of the things that I recommend you always convey to students, like you're in the beginning class because you are a beginner, then you move to the intermediate class because you're going to become an intermediate by the end. Then you're going to go into the advanced class and you will become advanced by the end. Because I think a lot of students, especially once you move beyond the beginning level, when you're really expecting people to start internalizing and using the language and knowing it, if you say, okay, you're going to be advanced next year, like I think sometimes they'll panic and they'll say, well, there's so much stuff I don't know how to do. Maybe I'll just go back to this one and take it again, thinking if I do the same thing, then maybe, but, and it's understandable because I think what I'm trying to convey to folks is I'm not saying you've mastered everything and now you're advanced, so you can go to advanced. I'm saying you've done the intermediate stuff and we're all going to be at various levels, but it's time to move to the advanced stuff so we can try to get you up to there. And so like, I would say getting people to hear is the longest, hardest part of the journey. And I would say probably 95% of indigenous languages are not currently getting folks from steps 5 to 9. And there's a hard reality there. But then what you have to do is figure out, well, how do we untangle that for our program? And I think speaking in a whole bunch is the only answer. But like, how can all these things add up? And how does your program have these, are we clear what we do for the advanced class? Are we clear what we do for the intermediate class? And so those are some things that I think about. And one of the things I thought about, does the language you work in have a set of stories that students can learn from? What do you think?
I think it shouldn't, like we do, but there's still that not knowing like how many stories and recordings are translated, and what's the exact number of all of them, and where are they all at, and how come they're not all in one place. So it can just be, I mean, I know why they're not shared out, because so many people are like, that belongs to our clan and you can't use it, or you can't, whatever. And that's why we are where we are right now, why we don't have a whole lot of things.
Right. Hokyunsk.
Yeah, Godum Teven and I are with our Samalgek, our cohort group, with working with Dr. D'Angeli. What we mainly do with her is study stories, and shadow a fluent speaker that's reading them. So she's got several of them recorded that are good to go, as far as, at least for these purposes. I don't know about sharing on a wide scale, but I'm pretty sure she's got permission to use these as for what she's doing. And I can't stress how much the combination of the language applied to the stories, as somebody that's starting to follow conversations and be able to do basic responses and stuff, and getting out of the vocabulary building stage and getting into the conversational stage. Hearing the fluent speakers run through those stories, and listening to that, and following along, and speaking, like shadowing their sentences and stuff, has done just leaps and bounds for my understanding on stuff. Plus, it's also interesting that there's a little bit of dialect change and a little bit of high language in it that isn't conversational. So those looking for those spaces where that happens and things like that just deepens the understanding a lot. So yeah, it's just such a important tool. We're real lucky.
Awesome. So like, here's what I generally recommend, and we're kind of slowly moving there with Tlingit, but we're not there. Is I think you should probably have, I would say, 10 stories and 10 speeches, right? And so and don't get into this mode where it's like, these are the only 10 stories that will survive. Like, don't even think about that. Just say, let's pick 10. What are 10 that we think students should know by the end of this program? We say they're an advanced learner. Well, they sure as hell should know these 10 stories, right? And I'm sure we could find them, right? So like for Tlingit, it's probably maybe the mosquito story. We could pick some raven stories, right? So it's just a matter of like picking ones that you think folks should be able to, and these are things that they're going to learn from. They're really going to learn from these stories. Beaver and porcupine, I think it would be a great one. And then what you're going to do is you're going to create 3 different versions of this story. And the big one is for the advanced learners. So this is someone who knows how to tell stories in your language, who can tell that story, or who told that story. You might have to go into archives and stuff to go find it. But it should be a whole version. It should be a whole version of that. And that's what the advanced students work with. For the intermediate students, we cook it down, right? It's like the vinegar that you're just going to cook down to this nice, tasty little sauce, right? Or the hooligan oil, whatever the thing is, right? So you can give them a little tiny kind, give them a little taste. So this is going to be, it's a short version. Maybe it's 50 sentences. Maybe it's 25. But and then the sentences are really to the point. There's fancy ways to say these things, but we're really going to scale it down. Then for the beginners, maybe it's a book with lots of pictures, and we don't want to insult anybody, make it feel like kids, but we were told when we started learning the language, Elder would say, Kalkashat, Florence Shakely, she said, well, how long have you been studying? Like 3 years? I thought I should know more. She said, well, you're basically like a 3-year-old. Just not as you're an adult, but you're 3 years old in this language. Give yourself some time and space. Give yourself room to learn. So then we have like a 10, 20 sentence, version of the story. And then we tell it, and we use lots of pictures. We use quite a bit of English probably to explain the things. But then they're picking out little words and things here and there. And ideally, every one of them could tell you that story at that appropriate version. By the end of year 1, they could tell you this 20 sentence. Maybe they only tell you 5, but they should know. They should be able to tell 5 little tiny stories. Even if it's totally just memorized. I've just memorized this. If you ask me to change any bit of it, if you use those words in a conversation, I might not even know them. But then the intermediate, it's a lot more in depth, and you spend a lot of time with these stories. On the other side is these sort of speeches or conversations. So maybe there's 5 speeches, 5 conversations. Because I think we need to also learn how to deliver the cultural performance that's sometimes required. Do you need to give a speech at a potlatch? Do you need to give a speech when the totem pole gets raised? Do you need to give is something that you say to people when a young girl becomes a woman, when a boy gets the first hunt, or whatever the things are, culturally appropriate. So for your culture, not like we all do the same thing, we all envision the same life, but just if the language is Koikan, that's a Koikan thing. Oh, this is a cultural situation that would require someone to say something. And then again, you have the full-on version of it for the advanced. You cut it down to the intermediate, and even if it feels like this isn't how you do it, that's fine, because you got to scaffold that up. Then at the beginning level, it's very short. So maybe someone does say, thank you for coming. It's great to see you. We're happy this happened. Good night, right? Even if it's just give them a little bit of confidence to do that type of thing. But then they start building it, and then it could be the same thing for conversation. Okay, see a couple of hands up. What's up?
That's something I was thinking about too, was like in classes like in the future that we're like kids are making the art for a story that they've never heard before, then that could be something where it's used and it's like broken down for them, like they're taking one paragraph of this whole story and making one picture for each. Like that could be broken down to where it's just, let's bring it over to the elementary. That way the kids can just read one sentence from their paragraph, break it down. That way it's kind of splits up the work, and then we don't have to go chasing grants to figure out how to fund it. It can be just a handoff from one teacher to the next, going down the ladder, going up the ladder would be, I think, a way to, and then the next year, different story, another story.
Yeah, I mean, like ideally, I think these same, like if you start learning Sika, then you move to Huna, then you move to Yakutat, then you move to Juno, like you should be learning basically the same stuff. I mean, I think, and you could certainly, and it's not like everybody has to do the same thing, but I think I would say let's all do this, and then if you want to do more, good, but everybody has to do this, and it's a bit of a push and pull to sort of get those things and get unified on that. But as we're developing these documents, like, okay, so if we have a curriculum handbook, maybe it identifies what those scenarios are. So like we are going to have these scaffolded versions of this same story. So scaffolding just, it really means like you're teaching something, but to the appropriate level, right? And that you have a plan, right? So like if I was going to teach people how to cut fish in Tlingit, the early version would be, okay, here's the names for the fish. Here's the name for the fish parts. That's it. Here's the tools, right? So that's it. It's just vocabulary. Then the next one would start being like some cutting things. I'm cutting, you're cutting, cut it, don't cut it carefully, sharpen your knife, like whole bunch of next level stuff. Then I'd sort of start climbing up from there. Okay, now we got to sort of get a whole bunch of commands so that you can get all the commands. We can say, pick up the fish, cut this fin off, do I know all the names of those fins? Cut that fin off, cut that fin off, cut this. And you might say, oh, my uncle cuts fish different than your uncle or auntie or whomever. You got to pick one and go with it for that particular lesson. Then it's going to go up, so it gets more and more complex. And then you get a bit of can you introduce dialogue into it? Question and answer. What kind of fish is it? Where did the fish come from? Who caught that fish? What are you going to make it into? Oh, what do you put into your brine? What do you use what kind of wood you use to smoke your fish? Why didn't you use cottonwood to smoke your fish, right? So you can have a whole bunch of different things. And then you can have, once you get up to the advanced levels, then it could be a whole bunch of other stuff. Like, how do you say, is it done? It's going to take, it needs one more day. It's ready to cut, pull it down, and so like, and then also getting into the substance of it, right? So, we make fish this way, but those guys make fish that way. Why is it different in these different places? Can you do that in the language? So the one thing I do like about these different approaches, and what I really liked about spending time with Deho was just sort of hearing like his thought process on how everything should be building towards something else. Like that was a big takeaway from the things that he was sharing on their programs at Six Nations. Other thoughts?
Well, I think that's common in like curriculum building is like the reverse engineering. I can't remember what they call it, but it's like you figure out what the end goal is. It's like advanced grade 12, and then you build backwards from there, and you could scaffold along the way. I can't remember what the heck they call it, but you start from where you want to be and then work backwards.
Yeah, right. And then figure out how you're going to get folks there. And I think for quite a few, and the other thing too is like, I like these processes. I like these discussions, but if your curriculum guidebook or your how-to manual of how to teach the language, if it's going to be like 400 pages long, nobody's going to read it. Right? So like what's the most economical? What makes sense? And if you look at these things, like what should they be doing? And 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks, 3 weeks from now, we're done, is we might end up with just a framework of these things. But I just want to make sure we're removing all the pressure of this must be the way and we must be the ones who figure it out. No, it's just like it's like a chance to just sort of experiment. But if these become the working documents, that's great. And so there could be some other things too. Like, let me ask you folks this. Who comes up with new words? And how does it work? Somebody tell me.
Whoever gets it online the fastest these days.
If it's on TikTok.
Yeah, that was Instagram. Dang it. Okay. Right? So yeah, sometimes it's just sort of like through consensus, right? Somebody comes up with it, then you start using it. Well, like and think of, well, how about this? How many people do you think are using the language you're working in for day-to-day communication on a daily basis? How many people? Ten or less? 50?
Probably around 10.
Yeah, so I would venture to guess for a lot of our...
That's probably like 30. I bet you 30.
Okay.
30 people.
So when we say like day to day, so people are this is what they use to communicate, right? Because that's the goal. A lot of indigenous languages are in this performative state. Like people don't use them until they need to perform. So if you're talking about like Yupik or Navajo, Ojibwe, they've got birth speakers. They've got new birth speakers, Hawaiian, right? So people are using this, but like, so I guess how many people are using the language to communicate the majority of their stuff to one other human being, right? And it's probably gets pretty small once you start sort of putting these different parameters on. But so the goal here is let's get it up to 50. Let's get it up to 100. But if 100 people were using Haida every day to talk about day-to-day stuff, they would probably find that they need a whole lot more words, right? You just might need some new words. We don't have a word for skiing or ice skating. And so we can kind of use some other word, but I think, well, let's just make it.
Seen there's a word for email.
Yeah, there's a word for email, right? So electronic paper, is that what it is?
It was a pretty long word. I was looking for draw knife and I seen that one. I was like, what?
Kashuku katangi, electric language, right? Yeah, and so so like, could you say, I'll text you about it? Could you, and so some of this has to do with technology. There's a threshold, right? Like I had a student who said, hey, could you translate PlayStation 5? And I said, or 4, this was a long time ago. Can you translate PlayStation 4? And I said, no, but why don't we translate video games? And then you can just say Nintendo or PlayStation, right? Like we don't need to translate every single thing. But maybe you do. Maybe you want to. It's kind of, we all have our decisions to make. But at some point, you're probably going to have to formalize this, not to limit people. But if you have 50 different people using the language every day, they're probably going to encounter stuff. Like what if you needed to say, well, there's a whole bunch of different sized knives, a whole bunch of different types of chisels, a whole bunch of, there's calipers, so if you're carving, you're going to have to, so someone's going to have to be one of the main contributors in particular areas, right? And even if you're not, what if you're into like basketball, or what if you're into fishing, or what if you're into weaving, what if you're into video games, like, so like someone's going to have to come up with a bunch of these terms. And then I would say develop a process that doesn't slow you down, but that does make sure that there's, so that there's a process. And it could be, like maybe there's a committee. What I'd recommend is a committee that meets like probably 4 times a year. Somebody's funding it or some program so that people are getting paid for their work. And then maybe there's probably a smaller group that gives the quick answer, right? So yeah, if someone says, hey, what are we going to say for charging cord? And someone says, kashuk, okay, we'll go with that. But then maybe they take that back to the committee, and the committee might say, well, that's not really a tail. So why don't we use kashuk tiki? And then, okay, so then you go back and you sort of do a little bit of repair, but it's just got to be a fairly open process so that you sort of say, okay, we want to be able to come up with something right away. So here's the ones that come up with names for us. And then they meet 4 times a year or whatever, so that they can review those and make sure that everybody's on board. But so that's called a Lexicon Committee. It's good to have. Also, like, there's a whole bunch of, what am I trying to say? there's probably a whole bunch of places that had names, and those names are lost now. So maybe we need to start renaming some things. So then there needs to be a process for that as well. And you need a book of dog and cat names. I'm telling you, so many times, like every couple months, I got what? Let me show you a picture of this dog. What should I name this dog? And I'll say, call it dog. Just call it dog. But then if I'll call every dog I have just Kate, which is dog. But people want to have names for dogs, and they should. They should be able to. But like I get a little tired of naming people's dogs. I just want to write a book that says here's what you name your gosh darn dog. So
Didn't Kagwaska, didn't he post something about a long time ago how Kate they were just like people, like they had names because they were so smart. They weren't like, they were still treated like dogs, but they had names like anybody else, didn't they? Or is that
it was J.B. Fawcett, and he said
JB?
a long time ago dogs were different. They were smart like people. And yeah, and some of those in the story that were like had cool names like Chewin' Ribs, and yeah, so they did name their dogs. So I'm not anti-dog naming. I just I don't know why that bothers me. Like, look at this kitten. But anyways, what else? How are we gonna build these programs? How are we gonna make speakers? How are we gonna get people to talk?
Is this all stuff we should be doing together outside of class, or we're just in here? Because
Yeah, let's
like building it up more so we can actually put it into practice, like is the goal, right?
I gotta listen to this real quick. So my buddy just told me how to say Haudenosaunee. There you go.
Sheesh.
Haudenosaunee.
It's my friend Monty Hall. So he works in what did I say it was? Oops, hold on. Lost my train of thought. He works in, I think, Tuscarora. Okay. Oh, yeah, so the question. Sorry. So what we'll do right now is, how many of these things I say we're going to make? 10? Isn't that amazing? Okay. So we're going to develop 10 documents. I think they should just be Google documents. So what I'll do now is we'll just start them live, and we're just going to figure out, well, let's brainstorm a little bit. We'll just do a blank document. What language should we do first, just as an example?
Alia.
Say it again.
Alia.
Which one? I can't hear you. Sorry. Oh, okay. All right, I wasn't coming through for some reason. Okay. And so, well, let me start this. Let's see. Move this so it's shareable. Okay. Let me get the link. Okay, so here's the link. So what I think is maybe for ease of the process, perhaps, what we'll do is we'll give this thing a title. And so, and then this could be something, you know, I know there's different ways to spell things, so we could take care of the spelling, however we want to do that. And so this would be a, I can't type and talk at the same time. What are we calling this? The curriculum, what did I say? What's it saying? The syllabus. Somebody tell me.
I think you just had it backwards before philosophy came after curriculum, right? Maybe.
So now we're going to have two main sections in this. And so, but it's kind of up to us. So we should figure out, like, what would the sections of a document like this be? Maybe an introduction? Oh, come on, do the thing. So, and then we'll put some text, and then we'll do the big parts. Somebody say something?
I was saying like a vision and or mission statement, maybe.
Nice, yes. So in here, we should have, so I use heading 2 for these. If you like fonts and stuff like that, you can mess with that. But we're thinking of more of the substance, right? So I think for like creating documents and creating, like if you want to write a language plan, if you want to do some stuff, one is, you know, this is just an exercise, right? There is no way we are going to write this plan for these languages. There's no way we are going to come up with this stuff. But this is purely a model, purely an exercise. We also have people who are working in these language communities here. So we are conscious of cultural appropriation. We're conscious of experts coming in and deciding what people should do. You know, I see it all the time. Someone who does not speak the language trying to tell the language community what they should be doing, right? And it drives you nuts sometimes. But what we're trying to do is develop a series of tools. So I think what you would do is you would have a series of meetings using the software we use, Miro, or just using boards, you know, but getting all the people who are there, you got to come to some sort of consensus. Because the other thing too, I think it's real easy to find yourself 10 years from now not doing hardly anything because nobody could agree on what the thing was to do. And you got to realize the boat is sinking. You don't have a lot of time to figure out if this is going to be the perfect thing. You got to say, here's what someone say. They said, well, we took a look at you guys and you're not the best, but you're what we need. And I was like, wait, say that again? You know, so that's the thing, is we're not trying to find the perfect, we're just trying to figure out what can we go on. Because also the thing about planning and like especially language planning, this is what you come up with, and if you looked at it 10 years from now, you'd probably go, what the devil were we thinking? But at the same time, you'd probably be right about a whole bunch of stuff. So it's a living document. It can change. You got to be ready for some of those, like if you really went and did this, there will be people, like here's the most maddening part for me of a planning process. One time we were having a planning process for an Indigenous studies program at a certain university. And so we all got together, all the relevant faculty, all the relevant staff. We went through, we just put all these notes on the wall, and then we sort of voted and we decided what to do. And I went and I took all those notes and I typed them up. And then I sent them out to everybody. And one of the people who was there said, who you to decide what we're going to do? I was like, this was us. We decided to do the thing. So be bold, be certain, be humble, listen. Because you also, in the planning process, let me say this, you might have the thing that you think everybody needs to do. But if everybody says, actually, no, let's do this other thing. And if that's the will of the group, then, you know, it's tough. It's tough because maybe you just do the thing. But maybe there's some part of you that's like, this is right. I know I'm right. And so it's a, you know, as far as advocating for stuff and what goes in there and what doesn't, it's a challenge. And whenever you have a planning process, when you cut things down, right? So there's the very open, creative, what should we do? How should we do it? You know, and that should have no limits, right? Even if you think it might be impossible, put it up there. Just put it up there. And then when you come down to a vote and say, okay, now we need to focus, what are the things we're really going to try and do this next year? And so make sure you have a good parking lot system, just like these last readings that we're not going to do next week. You just say, okay, we're not going to be able to get to that this year, but it's not that we're saying it's not important. We're just going to say, we'll revisit that next year. And those are tough things to have too, because that could be your idea, is getting put in that parking lot, and you know, sometimes, you know, in creative writing, they say sometimes you gotta kill your babies. And that's not a literal thing. That's just saying, like, sometimes as a creative person, your mind is really fixed on this idea, and sometimes you might have to let it go. So, sorry, I guess kind of rambling. So, heading, we had vision and mission, right? So, I'm just going to put...
Assessment too.
What's that?
Oh, assessment too in there, right? Like a pre-assessment and a during assessment and then a post-assessment.
Yeah, so maybe there's a section here which is the path to high fluency. And in here you've kind of got, this is how I like to brainstorm. Like, I just write the sections and I put the word text. I'm like, somebody can go write that later. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually just apply all of these same headers to the other documents. And it can adjust from there. But here's the thing. Try not... Okay, so we're going to collaborate on these documents, right? Let's say I wrote the introduction. Let's say I was like, I'll take a stab at it. Just to make sure we're honoring each other's creative spaces and energies and contributions. Don't go in and type over their text. Don't go in and erase their text. But instead, like, let's say I wrote this introduction here. So then someone else should come in and if you highlight the part, you can add comment. So you right click and however you right click on it, and you just put comment, and you can say maybe in this part we should do blah blah. So use a dialogue process if you're going to alter what someone else has contributed. But the path, you know, collaborating on documents is also can be exhausting, right? It can be tough, and so this could, if maybe you're just saying, yeah, and we can track changes. We'll use suggested edits, and we might come in too, and there might be things where we have, you know, are you talking about a different way to say the same thing? Or is there some foundational disagreement? Because if there is some sort of disagreement, right? There's the one language program I was talking to, they said, we don't teach it to anybody who's not ethnically from this language. I was like, oh, really? And they said, yeah. So, you know, if someone came up with some, you know, some statement, and if we said, so use the comments to say, and we'll try to sort of, everybody just, we'll all be nice. We got to come to some consensus as well. And so it could be like, you can flag this and say, can we talk about this in class? And we're going to use these class sessions to start working through these documents, right? So in here, so maybe I'll create, now I'll use heading 3 and say assessments. And then I might have pre and post, just sort of putting some ideas out there. And maybe even before that, before I even get to assessments, I need to say measuring fluency in, and I'm just going to put language. So then, we could just substitute with the languages. Who is the audience? So the audience for this is the language revitalization movement, in this case of Smalgach. So this is for them. So this is an internal document. This is basically saying, okay, we get this language, we got to bring this whole thing up. Can't do it if everybody's just sitting in the canoe paddling a different direction. We got to figure out how we're going to move this thing forward. And this is a fundamental missing element for a lot of our language programs, is that these things don't exist. And so this is just an exercise to create them. But yeah, it's a good question. Feel free to type if you guys want to think of ideas. This is an editable document. We're going to create 4 copies of it. And yes, you can use others. So if you found something, like let's say we went for the Alaska Native Language Preservation Advisory Council, their report. And so we went in here, we want to find some stuff to use. And say, let me just grab something. So if we just sort of want to grab this paragraph, we can copy it. And then we can paste it wherever we're going to paste it. So we'll paste it here. And there's a couple of things. One is figuring out so if we're going to use someone else's words, we should say according to the 2020 what do they call it? Biennial. So there's a few things. So you'd want to put Alaska preservation. Oops.
So when I looked at some curriculum too, like some even our readings, there was like unit or lesson outline, and then unit or lesson learning objective. Where would that be though in this talk? Because usually when we're reading it, it's like here's parts of it, and
so basically, I think a philosophy of education is saying, here's what we do. These are the house posts of your program. This is the foundation of your program. So there's a lot that I think that goes in here in terms of the values, the vision, and a whole bunch of stuff too, because if you could put something like this together, I think it gives you something to refer back to. For example, someone says, hey, I wrote a grant, and in this we're gonna make socks, and we're gonna put the language on the socks. And then you might sort of come back to this and say, well, this doesn't really fit within our plan. The socks idea is really cool, but I think we need to focus our energy on creating books for children so they could take them home and read them with their families, right? And so sometimes it gives you a little bit of an idea, just saying come back, get into these ideas. But also, there could be some things in here about being respectful to other people, being kind, correct. How do we correct? When do we correct? How do we teach this stuff? That way, if someone's in our language program and they do something that's mean or out of bounds, we also have this to go back to. Ideally, if you're putting something like this together as well, If you can get a lot of community support and buy-in and involvement, it's going to make it stronger. But it's sort of, it just gives you this, it's the foundational document of your whole language revitalization program. Which is daunting, I know. The curriculum methodology is saying, here's how we teach the language and here's the materials that we use. That's where something like that would probably go into. Feel free, you can use anything from any source, just cite it. Make sure we're citing it. Any preference on, I like Chicago Manual style. We got MLA fans in here, APA fans. Does anybody care?
I use the MLA, but I'm up for either or.
So under curriculum methodology, just looking at Duck Juice, let's try Chicago Manual style. It's the numbers and footnotes and bibliography method. Let me know if you need help with citation, just put at least where it comes from, and then we can work on that. It's not the most important part for me. So under curriculum methodology, there could be some things that we have in here, and we can rearrange these too. But we could have language documentation, right? And you might have some decisions to make here. Who should have access to the recordings? If there's recordings of speakers, how should they be, I remember one time there was a group. Well, I was talking with someone from the Bureau of Indian Affairs who was working on a project with us in Skagway. And this person said, hey, this group of people have a whole bunch of recordings of your community. I was like, what? Really? They said, yeah, they came here right before ANCSA and they documented a whole bunch of land use stuff, and they've got all those recordings over there in their office. I said, wow, awesome. So I called up the people at the office and I said, hey, I heard you folks got some recordings of people in our area from, and before I even finished, they said, you're not going to get those. I said, what? Oh, so, well, you got recordings of people from our village, our home, and would like to hear them. And they said, you're not going to get those recordings. I said, why not? And they said, we're protecting them. I said, for whom? And they said, for the Klan. I said, we're the Klan. I was getting frustrated, right? And so coming back, there could be some things also that maybe you want to put, and some of this might go here. So curriculum is mostly like, what do we use to teach the language? How do we, so it's like saying, sorry, I dropped my pencil. So it's saying like, we are going to use TPR at the beginning of classes for beginners. And here's some of the things that we like to use and say. We're going to use these 5 stories to be teaching beginning, intermediate, and advanced. Here's some scaffolded version. And we don't have to create all that. We're just sort of trying to envision what these things could look like. And then maybe some of your future work is take it and run with it, develop it, work with your communities, work with your speakers. Because I think one of the things that really holds us back is the divisions within our groups. There's probably 50 people in the world who are actively, probably less, maybe 20 people in the whole world who are actively working and doing something to try and keep the Tlingit language going. And we have tremendous disagreements within those groups of people. Maybe there's 50, I don't know. So how do you deal with that? And some of that in here, in this philosophy of education, could be, how do we deal with conflict and moving forward as a program? How do we unite? You got people in Canada. How you can pull them in? You got people from this tribe, that consortium, this ANCSA corporation. How you gonna pull those ones in? So some of that stuff might go in there. And then some of the language documentation stuff might go in there as well. Who has the right to record? What should happen to those recordings? Who should have access to those recordings? Who shouldn't have access to those recordings? Yeah, and so there's a bunch of stuff that you might have to figure out. And it might differ from community to community. Like there was I was working in Kasan, and this guy came over and he gave a pretty wild proposal. I don't know the whole details, but he got a hold of us and said, I got this proposal. I want to share it with you. So we said, all right, you're gonna come here? He says, yeah. I'm coming up from Seattle. I said, okay. And so like, I don't know what his deal was, and I don't want to make fun of him, but he gave us this magazine cover and it had windmills on it. And he said, windmills. And we said, yeah, and what about this? He's like, windmills. We said, okay, take it from the top. What are you saying? He's like, we're gonna build these windmills. The Russians are already on board. It's a go. And so like this, we're having a real hard time because like a proposal should like tell us what you're trying to do, tell us what you want us to do, and so it was a very interesting, thing. And we started to think, okay, we don't know what this guy's doing. But then he started telling us he was from Heidelberg, and he's like, I got all these recordings from the elders, and the elders gave it to me. And I said, oh, is it in Haida? He says, yeah, I've got these boxes. I got these boxes of recordings from the elders. He kept saying it over and over. And I said, well, can we get copies? He said, no. It's just for Heidelberg. And he didn't even live in Heidelberg. And so like, but these types of things, right? Should you have recordings of elders that's just going to sit on your shelf, collect dust, and then the tape's going to get old and break? Or, but every language community is going to have to figure this stuff out. And then how do you get this stuff used? Because if there's nobody using the language on a daily basis at a deep level, or maybe there's just a handful, you're going to have to figure out how to create access to the language. Other thoughts? What else? What else we got to put in this thing? We'll frame it out.
Just a quick question, like about what you were saying. So is there like currently a protocol like in place, like if something happens to like fall in your lap, who do you call? Like if you want to be respectful, blah, blah, blah. Is there like one specific person, or is it like one per region? Or, I mean, is it more sort of common sense? You just like, I don't know, call whoever's leading a language program, like in your community.
Somebody answer the question. What do you folks think? I'll tell you what I think, but what do you folks think? Someone says, hey, I got this box of tapes. What should I do with it? What would you tell?
I think if someone's got a box of tapes, they should be digitizing it or getting it digitized, no matter which way they go with it, because it's got to be digitized anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Probably don't give it all away, that's for sure.
and once digitized, it needs to be made available to language learners.
Yeah, right. Like, and so again, so here, so maybe vision and mission, consensus and implementation. So here's where I would put like just sort of like here's I'll put some questions in there. How often do we revise the plan? What if we disagree? And then I'm going to create this other thing, which is access to the language. And then there's a whole bunch of subcategories in here, right? And it's going to include documentation of the language. My feeling, my theory, is the language should be accessible to all learners. All the whole language, because everything's right on the cusp of being lost forever. So, my recommendation is, yes, digitize everything. And we need a local, I think we need a regional office of the Alaska Native Language Center. They are charged with documenting and distributing and creating materials for Alaska Native languages. They get money every year from the state government to do so. And I think it needs to be revitalized. I think it needs to be, it's got to be built up a little bit. I think people have been doing awesome stuff there. I think there's been great people, but I think it needs to be Indigenous control. I think it needs to be Indigenous centered. I think it needs to be just sort of re-examined in terms of what it does and how it doesn't. Because it's
I
not.
agree, like with all those things. Sorry for interrupting.
What?
Yeah, I agree with all of those things. I guess I was just thinking more along the lines that, so I'm hearing like digitization. I agree with that. I agree that it should be in Indigenous hands, blah, blah, blah. And so like me, like not being like, I don't have any right to any of this, like very like well aware and recognize that. So I feel like, do I just like call up See Alaska right away and be like, hey, yo, like Old Town Bob just gave me all this stuff. Like, do I send it to you? Like, is that basically you just call SHI for Southeast, and then, that would kind of correlate like with whatever region that you're in.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there should be, well, so one is like, so there's archiving, there's digitization, there's access, and there's archiving. So those are sort of three distinct things that I think about. So digitizing means, okay, we got this thing, it's a reel-to-reel. We got this thing, it's a cassette. We got this thing, it's a mini disc, right? Even a mini disc is digital, but it's outdated technology, right? So then the goal of digitization is making sure that this is in I think make sure that it's in some format that's going to be recognizable today. So usually like a WAV file or some movie file. And so there's a group of folks that figure that stuff out and figure out like, and we need to build up probably an office that does that stuff, that could take stuff for particularly the languages of Southeast Alaska. But there's also the Alaska Native Language Center that's just located here. And they do digitization. They can take and you've got someone there who understands the process, who could look at a reel-to-reel and tell you what it might need in order to safely transfer it to a digital medium. The second question is access. So like people should be able to access this stuff. And I think here is a place where you probably need some committee that's in charge of this. So a Lexicon Committee is charged with making new words and sort of figuring out how to keep the language up to date. The other one, I'll have to take a look and see what they call the thing. But basically there should be a committee as well that's sort of in charge of protecting different aspects of the language. And this is something like one is I think the philosophy should be create as much access as humanly possible. Keep the languages out there, keep them going. I do think it's worth listening to things and saying, these are things that if they're in English, they should actually be protected. What if it says you're the best fishing grounds, hunting grounds? What if it talks about where medicine people are buried? What if it talks about, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And then there's some stories that aren't for everybody, right? Somebody killed a slave and chopped the slave's head off and drug it all over a glacier, and the glacier melted. Now people can travel over it. I don't know if that story's for everybody. Maybe not. Maybe so. So then you can sort of have these different levels of access. I think an easy way to take care of that. There are more sophisticated ways where you can have a whole database and every user gets a certain access level. So there's this, I think it's called Mokotu, I can never remember the name of it. But there's an access design for accessing digital content. So basically, I could put myself in there, Haudenosaunee, I'm Tlingit, I'm Haida, I'm Yupik, I'm Sami, and now I've got these 4 access points. Maybe I can access some Yupik recordings. Maybe I can access some Tlingit recordings. And then you can also have different levels, like I am Shukach Adi, so maybe I can access that clan's information. I'm from Skagway, so maybe I can access that village's information. I'm a language teacher, oh, maybe I can access everything, I don't know. And then, but another way to do it without having a whole database set up and users and all this other stuff, which takes, that's maybe a long range vision. Maybe that's something we figure out for the particular languages. I think just one, here's stuff that we need to just put out there, say what it is, and let people know how to, okay, let people know how to find it, you know. But then there might be some stuff where you say, okay, this stuff is there if people ask for it. That's all they got to do is ask for it, and then we'll give it to them. But it's not just sitting there for anybody to go grab. Then there could be some stuff that says, okay, sure, this is out there, but we're not going to translate it because or we will, but the translation is for the group. This is for the language group. And so some of this stuff, it may end up being that way. This has the cry songs of our clan. That's not for everybody. That's, but at the same time, those conversations need to be had because you got whole clans now for Tlingit. There's not a single speaker in that clan. What you gonna do? Okay. Sheesh.
I heard someone say before should have some kind of kuich for some of these clans that are. I mean, there's got to be a couple that are gone, right? How many people are left of the? I mean, there's a couple that are right on the map. I'm not sure which ones, but I'm betting there is. Something should be done for them, right?
Yeah.
Oh, the Kadok Adi, that's what I was thinking. There's one of them that I was thinking of. And I'm not sure where they're from or if I heard I don't know. I heard different things about where they're from or a clan that was them first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So like this whole, and so under here, there's also going to be access under the access to the language. It could be histories, or could there's someone went on like Juno Afternoon, I guess, and said like, they're talking in public about the history of the clans, and you're not supposed to do that, right? And so yeah, there's stuff to it's interesting, right? Like from my perspective as someone who teaches the language and works in the culture, like I think hardly anybody knows this stuff anymore. I think there was a time when most people did know this stuff. But now a lot of the kids are like, I'm a eagle. Then that's all they know. That's all they know. Or if they're on this clan, those guys are that clan. We don't share with them. And they're like, oh, you know what? You guys were the same clan like 100 years ago. So, anyways.
The way Celebration 82 is run too, it's someone gets up and they talk about their clan and all their stuff, and then this clan and all their stuff, and everybody else's stuff, and they're talking all about their own clan. And like, all I've ever heard was you don't talk about your own. I mean, yourself, but they're talking about their clan history and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the things I've always heard say, "Oh, we don't talk like that," but they're the best, and they are.
Yeah, right. So back to this access to the language. So you have documentation, and this is where you should put some stuff for like, what if somebody comes in? So yeah, I'm a student in linguistics. And I would really like to come in and work with your speakers of Samalgach, and I want to figure out how they deal with aspect and verbs, and I want to document this, and I'll go work on my dissertation. Do you have some sort of plan for them? Do you have something that they can sign? And so for me, for Tlingit, I would want them to sign that something that says, this stuff will never be yours, and you cannot leave with it. Everything that you record, you must leave a copy here, and you could never tell anybody from the language community that they cannot use your stuff. So, I mean, I think you need to be clear about that. I think you also need to be clear that they leave a copy of everything they do, that they are not allowed to copyright anything that they create with the language, and they're also not allowed to restrict any access to any of it. And so, but that's probably, this should go the same for internal folks, right? And so when I say internal, external, like there's just gonna be some things that you might have to outline, maybe not. But you know, there was a time a linguist left in the night and they took the recordings of so many people's ancestors with them, and now they're gone. And that's 100% unacceptable to me. So is the treatment of other, you know, it gets complicated, but I've seen white linguists who are very cruel to indigenous language learners who try to sort of become content creators of their own. So, you know, we want to foster an environment of total like content creation. People should be making videos, people should be making, you know, under access to the language. I would probably say maybe even one step above that would be normalization. What is the plan to make sure the language is just commonly heard and seen? Radio programming, internet TV thing, puppet shows, graphic novels, films, animations, street signs, place name restoration, signs in, you know, could you develop a program where you develop a whole bunch of signs for like ordering food, paying for food, doing a whole bunch of stuff in the language. Then you give this to local businesses and with a check for $1,000. We'll pay you $1,000 to put this up in your place, and you just be comfortable with us coming here and using our language. And then what's this? And so these are some things I'm hoping to see a plan for. So strategies for, it's called vernacularization. It's a long word. It just means, how do we make sure that this is the language that people use? It's got to be more than hi, how are you, how's the weather? Okay, let's switch to English to talk about everything else. What do people want to talk about? How do we get them to make this the language of choice? Right? And so these are some big questions. And this is where you get back to language in the home. How do you, and so maybe there's also a whole section here. So it's like, I'm just brainstorming, creating these sections, right? So I'm going to put here, and then here, and then here. And, you know, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that you'll see in here that's just purely placeholder text. So you don't have to put a comment that says, can I replace this? Just replace it. That's just a placeholder. But if we start sort of filling some things out in here, let's try and be more additive than editing until we feel like we've got this thing at a pretty good spot. Then we'll move into the editing phase, and we're not publishing this thing. I mean, people can see if they watch our class, but We are not trying to tell people what to do. At the same regard, though, if you don't have a plan, you're probably not going to get it done, right? And so where someone's going to, you know, the other thing here is also like, yeah, so going back, I'll try and find that as well. So sometimes the accession is the term that they might be using. And maybe under here, one thing that I would probably put for, wherever I put it, for this documentation part, hopefully everyone's going to remember everything that I'm saying right now. Not only, I think, for when people come in and work on your language, I think wherever those speakers are from, a copy should be sent to their home community. And that's something I need to work on, right? So that I say, oh, I recorded your speakers. Here's, I can need to send this back to Carcross. Here's the speakers I recorded, right? So anyways, we'll keep doing a little bit more of this. So I think on Wednesday, we'll continue to take a look at Deho's writing and his book on these Haudenosaunee languages, and then we'll continue to sort of look at this. So what I'll do probably tonight is I'm going to make 5 copies of this, and then we'll just sort of, or I guess once we feel like we've, and they could be a little bit different. But some other things too. If you're working in any of these languages, go find us some amazing chunks of language that you think should be in there, right? Phrases, sort of these things, like when you read that one from Hawaii, like it has whole poems, whole chants that are in there. They're like, this encompasses what we do and how we do it. Fun stuff, you guys. Thanks for all your work. See you on Wednesday.
Jorgen.
Hymnism.
Gite Dogden. See you.
Cheesh, how